Hello, hello. Anybody
You're
out
live.
there? Is anybody alive out there? Anybody alive? So today we're talking more about the light body, what it actually means to have your light body switched on, and how fields cross and we feel empathy, where we can actually feel other people and how that works and how that leads to compassion and actual healing. But first I want to
Are
tell
you
you,
covering up a Pink Floyd T-shirt?
yeah, Pink Floyd is my favorite band of all time, by the way. And the Beatles take second prize with me, but that's still big. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Beatles, and there's so many bands that I grew up with, but there's something about Pink Floyd. I can't describe it, how it makes me feel, and how poetic. Pink Floyd, for me, they're storytellers. So today, I just want to tell you a story. So today, we're getting close to when the real snow comes here. And so I went out and I go in the forest above me with my chainsaws and I look for a tree that's dead. So I fell this tree. And you know that when you're falling a tree by yourself and you got nobody to help you, you pray to God it falls in the right direction, doesn't land on you. And I cut the tree and you hear it cracking and I run, and when it hits the ground, boom. So then I had to cut that up in sections and throw it in the back of the truck, and then split all my wood and keep the fire going and keep my kids warm because they're all, just getting over this little flu that's going around. And then in the morning when I get up, I make a tea. I make like a yerba mate or a really nice white tea, and I wait till I feel this resonance happening. When I meditated this morning, there's so much bliss and so much pure ecstasy in expanded consciousness. I think it gets to levels that I think would actually be difficult and be terrifying for a lot of people to be vibrating at such a high frequency and be in the field of such high bliss. It actually takes training, believe it or not. And Jesus said, split a piece of wood and I am there. This is in the Gospel of Thomas. So that's what I've been doing today. And I think here's an interesting factoid. My neighbor told me this, who's an engineer, that a tree that rots in the forest will emit as much CO2 as if you, the same amount as if you burn it for firewood. So there's all these dead trees, and they actually contribute to forest fires because it's fuel. And I think of all the people who are going to be freezing to death in Europe this year. And Canada is loaded with, like, you go, because I used to be a tree planter for 23 years. You go in the forest, and there's sections of trees that don't fit on the logging truck, and they just leave them there to rot. And those could be keeping families warm in all sorts of places. And nobody's thought of this. Nobody's thought of, getting, giant tankers, ocean liners full of firewood and sending them to Europe to keep everybody warm. Nobody's even thought of that. So today we're talking about, the evidence in the scriptures where Jesus is talking about this light body activation and how it conquers darkness and therefore how it conquers suffering. And when most people think of healing themselves, they're trying to get rid of every little pain so there's no pains in the body, so they're nice and comfortable and there's no disease. But actually, in a way, the opposite is true. When we raise our frequency vibrations, suffering doesn't touch you anymore. It actually doesn't, because when you start radiating with real light and your light body switched on from doing the work of frequency work, those little pains don't even register at all anymore. And I can testify to this, having worked with frequencies and breath and meditation for 45 years. And in the last 10 years, I've really come into a full frequency practice that has taken, my spiritual light body to a whole other level that is something quite remarkable. Now, when you look at the scripture, and I have Luke 11:33 to 36 in front of me. And this is amazing because Matthew 6:22 says, if thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be filled with light. Right. So, and single means no longer in duality. And single could have been translated from the Greek into simple. But when you read the new biblical translations, which are commentary, most Christians think it just means coming into right understanding. But when your body's full of light, it actually conquers the darkness. And this is in Luke 11:33-36. And so I'm just going to read it. No man, when he hath lighted a candle, putteth it in a secret place, neither under a bushel but on a candlestick, that they which come in may see the light. So what he's saying is there, don't be humble and hide when your light body's alive, because people need to learn from you how they can have this come to this same place. And that was the work of the early Christian movement, is the apostles, including the women that followed Jesus, and the 72 minor disciples were cruising across the landscape, and they were people, when they saw them, like there's incredible descriptions in the story of Thecla, the Acts of Paul and Thecla of Iconium, where when she sees Paul, she can see this light on him, and he's like no other. And she's this astoundingly beautiful woman that her mother's trying to marry into rich families, and she wants no part in it. She just wants that light. And so that means that they were very magnetic and very radiant in the state they were in. So verse 34 says, the light of the body is the eye. Therefore, when the eye is single, thy whole body is also full of light. But when the eye is evil, the body is full of darkness. Take heed, therefore, that the light which is in thee be not darkness. So what he's saying there is the darkness is actually the brooding suffering, is the consciousness that has not conquered suffering, and that it's also because one of the leading causes of suffering is not leading a life that is heart and love based centered, but a person goes into other symbols that don't lead them to a heart and love felt radiance that eventually gets bright enough to actually conquer suffering. And you could say in a simple way that when two people fall in love, that in that romantic stage of love, they both feel that together they are rising above suffering until they have their first disagreement, and then later in the relationship they want a divorce. So the conquering of the darkness is much greater than the attainment of romantic love, because romantic love, and anybody can tell you, it can last a long time. There are rare examples of people who remain in love to the day they die, and those are admirable people, because it's not just their relationship. They have some other form of attainment that allows them to be in relationship for that long, and it's very, very admirable. So continuing in verse 36, if thy whole body therefore be full of light, having no part dark, the whole shall be full of light, as when the bright shining of a candle does give thee light. So this is about the conquering of the dark by the light. And that would mean this is a work. There's no description here that says the moment you get baptized, this happens to you. It doesn't say that at all. It says the light of the body is the eye. Therefore, when thine eye is single, which means it's a work. It's something you do, right? It's a coming into, a maturing into this state for your whole body to be full of light. And you can see plenty of examples. I've done a lot of research into even Christian ministers that were tormented by this inner darkness and actually committed suicide. There's whole books written on this where, the whole church is praying for this, their pastor, because he's being tormented by, you can call it mental illness or darkness. And he can't beat it, even with all the prayers of the church, and he ends up committing suicide. Now, that doesn't mean that when he died, he went to a dark place at all. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that in the body, that battle was so great between the light and the dark. So in the beginning, it's in a way we all battle what is the right choice in our life that's going to lead to more love and to more light in our heart-centered awareness. And we can also be tempted by people and offers that contradict a light of love and life and light. And therefore we go into more darkness and we go into more despair and depression. And those are classic, right? When Jesus is tempted by Satan after his 40-day fast in the wilderness, Satan is saying that he will offer Jesus anything in the world if he bows down and worships him, which is absurd when you consider, like, I can tell you that when I go into this whole body state of light every morning when I meditate, there is so much actual ecstasy. There's no pleasure that money, corrupted sex, there's so many things in the world. Like, not everybody has the same symbols. We all have different symbols. There's nothing in the world that someone could give me that I would trade to take away this light that I feel. But yet, how many people come unto a light that truly conquers all temptation, right? So when Jesus was being tempted by Satan, he wasn't actually tempted. It's more of a drama play, because he's God. He's full of light, and the ecstasy and the supremacy of the consciousness in that light, which is far beyond what I feel, because he's Christ, he's God in the flesh, dwarfs like a supernova all earthly pleasures and all good things that the world could even offer a person. Because you can say, what are the good things that, in life? I'll offer you a speedboat and your own dock and a mansion and $1 billion, all these things. And anybody like who has those things, after a while, can tell you they don't bring you lasting happiness. And in fact, they may actually bring you people that don't even love you for who you really are. So it's a very, very challenging thing to be an exceedingly wealthy person. I'm not saying that some of those people don't know the light, and some of them probably do. But I'm saying that that's not a condition. The worst thing we do in life is we put conditions. We say, I won't open my heart until there's all the other things that I want first, money, security, success, and then later I'll open my heart. And meanwhile, by putting conditions, you're missing out on the possibility of this enormous awakening within. And that's what Jesus is talking about here in Luke. And this is very important because, again, so many Christians think the work is done the moment they're baptized, and it's not. This is very clear here. Also, when Jesus said, seek you first the kingdom of heaven and all else will be added unto you, means seeking the kingdom of heaven is a work. It's not given the moment you're baptized. I mean, I was 2 weeks old when I was baptized. I mean, no, I wasn't full of light. I wasn't. The ecstasy I feel now in meditation, and that's only one word. There's far more than ecstasy. There's blinding love, blinding ecstasy, blinding peace, and there are qualities in the light we don't have names for. So if I compare the happiest days as a kid, growing up in San Francisco as a kid, playing on the beach and running up and down the beach, collecting seashells, what did I feel then compared to what I feel now? What I feel now dwarfs my childhood ecstasy. It dwarfs it like a supernova. Like I was just a tiny little candle compared to the light of the sun today. So my measuring rod tells me that what I'm doing is really working. So what does Jesus say here? No man, when he lights a candle, puts it in a secret place, neither under a bushel nor on a candles, but on a candlestick, that they which come in may see the light. Meaning to preach and to tell others the way to get your candle lit is really a consistent practice of the original Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, which is, O thou from whom the breath of life comes. So that's the practice of breathing. Who fills all realms with sound, light, and vibration. That's frequency, right? But so it's the breath and the frequency and the light. O thou from whom the breath of life comes, who fills all realms with sound, light, and vibration, may you touch me in my most holiest. Let your will come true in all that is material and dense. That's the way Jesus spoke the Lord's Prayer in his language of Aramaic. We changed it to our Father who art in heaven. So he didn't address a man in heaven, because the name of God in Hebrew, the tetragrammaton, means I am, the infinite I am consciousness. It is unnameable. It's unknowable as a person until the person of that totality takes birth in the flesh, and that's Christ, the person who becomes anointed at the moment that he comes upon the river Jordan, and John the Baptist anoints him and baptizes him and says that he who is here is far greater than I, and he will baptize you with fire and the Spirit. So we talked about that last time. So how the practices that are missing are enormous in the scriptures, because the tools were all removed. The modern Christian movement, which has in a way, I feel they have taken all of the things that the old religion had, which are the Jewish people, and the Jewish people were not solidified. They were not in agreement. They were all arguing with each other. They were all fighting with each other, but yet they had the Holy of Holies temple, they had the staffs, and they had the practice of the sacred vows and the sacred words, which is in the book of Psalms. And yet it seems like when the Christian movement formed, it was trying to separate Jesus from being a Jewish rabbi, and he wasn't doing that. There was nothing about him that threw everything away from the old world at all. I mean, he abolished circumcision of the flesh, but then at the same time, he's yelling at everybody and turning the tables in the temple because he didn't want commerce happening in the temple, because the temple is a holy place. That is the Holy of Holies and the holy place. The Holy of Holies is a cube, 10 by 10 by 10 and cubits, and then the holy place, 10 by 20 cubits. And then at the time of Solomon, all of that doubled. And so Jesus is turning over the tables because he's telling you the temple is important to me. In fact, the moment he's crucified and the lightning bolt tears open the fabric that's this thick, the linen that surrounds the Ark of the Covenant, and opens it up, he's putting absolute importance on the temple and the Ark of the Covenant. He's saying, look, now some Christians think it means the opposite of that he's getting rid of that. Well, if it wasn't important to him, why is he flipping out and flipping over the money changers' tables in the temple? Because it's important to him. Right? And you don't have Holy of Holies in Christian churches. You don't have the priest is not holding a 2.5 cubit staff, right? Which he's supposed to be, because in Mark 6:1-8, Jesus sends the apostles out and they have to have their staff. So the Christian movement today doesn't have that. They got rid of it all. And so what does that do? What does it do to people to get rid of it all? Well, they lose the way to come into this light body activation that we were just reading in the scripture in Luke 11:33-36 and Matthew 6:22. And again, it's repeated everywhere in the scriptures that the real message is that when a person gets activated, they suddenly see the kingdom of heaven is in their midst. It's right here. That the awakened person recognizes they're actually in paradise right now. St. Teresa of Avila said in the interior castle, after going through the 7 levels of interior illumination, that when she dies, there'll be no change, because heaven is so fully present right here, right now, that there won't be any difference when she dies. Somebody said here, so magic mushrooms, not the same frequency. it's funny because when I used to listen to Pink Floyd in the 70s, I took magic mushrooms a few times, and I didn't. I did, by comparison, I can tell you it's not even the same thing at all. It may help certain people who there's good studies now that are showing that it can take a person out of a critical state of depression, and I'm not judging anything, right? Because Jesus told us not to judge. Maybe these plant-based medicines are here to help people. I can tell you I did those things a few times. I have something to gauge them by. I did a lot of things once when I was in high school, right? I think I smoked marijuana for a year and a half, and then I was done with it. I'm done. I'm meditating every day, meditating every day. Don't need those things anymore because what I started to experience in the meditation was far better than any of those things. Yes, I've done MDMA once. I did cocaine once. Although I have no proof of that because there's no evidence. But other than this, Pink Floyd, and I went to all the rock concerts and all those things. I used to go to clubs in LA and just drink soda water. I didn't even like the feeling of being drunk on alcohol. I like a glass of wine, but I don't like the feeling of being drunk. The feeling I get when I'm meditating is so mind-blowing. It feels like you're a flame in this super high frequency field of ecstasy that extends for thousands of miles. And the brightest part of it seems to be above exactly what they call the halo. I can feel this extremely bright ecstasy just above the top of the head, and the radiance of it is huge. And this happens to me every single day. It's been going on for about 6 years now. Every single day, no matter how difficult the things in my physical life are, it's been happening every day. And I attribute it to doing the breath work, the frequency work, and the work of insight. And there's also a point where breath and frequency takes you to a certain place where you suddenly make the leap to God. And you realize you don't believe in God anymore, you feel God. So absolutely. And you really realize that it is God. There's no person. Because the Bible tells us, the definition of God. It's not a person. It's the infinite I am. I am that which came into being is the meaning of the YWHW. And actually it gets so deep, and this is why I don't judge any other religions in the world, because they have similarities in their own right to coming into the place of being in the pure I amness. And I could go in because I've studied many of the world's greatest religions, and when I study them, I don't just read 2 or 3 books. I'm studying each one of them for years and years and years. So, but my choice personally is because I've met Christ 7 times in person, a flame shining brighter than our sun. That I've met the Dalai Lama in person in India. I've met many of the gurus that are very, very famous in person, and none of them in my experience comes anywhere near Jesus Christ. So, but I'm not trying to convert you. That's not why I'm doing this. Why I'm doing this is because I made this discovery that frequency tuning devices, which even a sitar or guitar could technically be, and the practice and seeing a temple, and it's why did God require the Holy of Holies to be measured precisely? Precisely. Why? Because a wavelength is a frequency. So then I started calculating the frequencies of the holy temples. And when I looked at the numbers, I was astounded. And recently, I took the exact measurements using the proper cubit of the breastplate of Aaron as a wavelength. And when I looked at the number, it would blow people's mind. How could that number appear as the wavelength? So you take the speed of light in inches divided by the wavelength in inches, and you got your frequency. How could God design the breastplate of Aaron to a? I'm going to tell you a number. It's 432 times 10 to the something. So that's what I'm going to tell you. It's 432. But it's not 432 hertz. It's 432 times 10 to the something. And the fact that there's 432 there for all the 432 people out there, and it's God, and this, see, the tablets of Moses, and I just learned this, because we all gauge the movie The Ten Commandments. Moses is walking with a wooden staff. He never had a wooden staff because God said to put a copper coil, a copper serpent in the language of symbols, on the pole, which turns it, and it's a metal pole. And then you end up finding out the staff is made of has 7 sapphires in it. Then you find out in Ezekiel the throne of God is made of sapphire. And then you find out from the Jewish scriptures that the tablets of Moses are a square, and they're about this deep and about this big, and their frequency of their wave, and they're made of sapphire. Sapphire is almost as hard as a diamond. So to carve the 10 commandments in the sapphires, you would need a laser to do that. You couldn't do that with a hammer and chisel. No way. You're not going to hammer a sapphire in.
So what do you think it was? A lightning bolt?
No, I think God, God in Ezekiel is flying in some kind of massive spacecraft sitting on a sapphire throne. So that's the body of a being, which would really be Christ before he was born, that was either that or it could have been a prophet, because we know by the definition of God that there is no person there. It is infinite I am. Right. So when we come to our own I amness, the just pure I am awareness, we're coming into our own awakening of seeing the infinite presence of God that was planted in every one of us by transferring the breath, the ruach, which is the Hebrew name for the breath that was breathed into Adam's nostrils and Eve's nostrils. That breath contained the Spirit of God, and that when every baby is born, we start breathing, and it's like passing the torch and lighting another torch and lighting another human torch. The secret. That's why the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic starts with, "O thou from whom the breath of life comes," because that's the beginning of the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic. So it's the breath, and then who fills all realms with sound and light. You have to have sound first before you get light. And in the real world of physics, a star will not start burning until there's a vibration first. And once you vibrate the hydrogen and the helium in the star, and you create fusion through frequency and vibration, then you get light. So light is actually heat. It's heat, right? So you don't have heat. And of course, our infrared light, and I've said this a million times, that radiates off of our body travels at the speed of light. It's just below the color red. So it reaches the sun in 8 minutes and 21 seconds, and then it comes back to us in 8 minutes and 21 seconds. So somebody's saying they tune their guitar to 432 hertz. Yeah, so that's middle A should be 432. But then you have to adjust all your other notes around that. You can't leave all your other notes in the same place. So it's a huge thing to have a proper 432 scale. But why is the breastplate of Aaron 432? And I can show somebody. I mean, I'm gonna release this soon, and show everybody the math. But the key of the temple and the Ark of the Covenant is that it is what it does. And this here, this is there's one more level to this. When I'm done the highest level, I'll be demonstrating this. There's 3 levels to this, and it transmits a field using the frequencies that I'm talking about 61 to 62 feet wide. And the purpose of the Holy of Holies, when it was alive, when it was active in Solomon's temple, And prior to that, when it was in the tabernacle, in the tent that traveled with the Jewish people, is that between the Ark of the Covenant and the 12 staffs, the staff lay inside of the ark, and the ark is 2.5 cubits. This is in the book of Hebrews, which is telling us how long the staffs were and why they had to be 2.5 cubits. And you have to use the right cubit or you're going to be way off, because those were the tools. The temple as a frequency tuner was to raise the vibration of the whole temple complex so that when anybody came near it, it would lift them up to a point that for them to do their prayers, they were standing already in a higher frequency environment. So it's easier to make the leap to God. So that's what I'm trying to tell you. There's a point where you're doing the breathing work, you're doing the frequency work, and you start to feel so high, you're ready to leap to God. And when you leap to God is when you go into the supreme bliss state, the supreme ecstasy. And but if you don't use these tools, the temple is the frequency tuner and the staffs, then you're just going to work a lot harder. It's not impossible to do it, but it's just going to be way harder for you. not having that. So why is it then that?
And using the staff would be way faster too, not just harder. Not
well, yeah,
just easier,
well,
right?
Jesus said, in Mark 6:1-8, and 1:8 is 6:18 is golden ratio, by the way. And also that if you look at Matthew, where is it that the quote of it's 6:18, upon this church I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, is the scripture is 6:18, which again is golden ratio. And when you know the secret to the right cubit, the height of the temple of Solomon is 30 cubits. That's the height of the temple. But the Holy of Holies is 20 cubits by 20 cubits by 20 cubits. But 30 cubits using...
There's definitely a code to the Bible, because I was reading about the 144,000 yesterday, and it's verses 14, 1-4.
Right. So you have the 144 and the 144 and the 432. And we'll go into this more precisely. I mean, for this group, I've been teaching people in my inner circle this stuff for years, getting right down to the frequencies. Because when people say raise your frequency, I say, what do you mean? There's infinite numbers of frequencies. And if you don't have the right frequency, you're actually detuning yourself, right? So pick up a guitar and just start plucking it when it's out of tune, and then try and sing a song to it. But when your guitar is tuned, especially if it's tuned to 432 middle A, you feel the resonance inside of you. You're responding to that. And when we walk into a room and then somebody else comes into a room, why do we feel that person at a distance? Because we're not just these bodies, right? We're resonant beings. We have a magnetic field, which is proven. At Dartmouth College, they measured the magnetic field of the human heart and the human brain. Absolutely proven that we have a magnetic field. So therefore, when, if I use these tuned coil systems, and these are clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, and then the next level clock. So they're spinning counter to each other. I'm generating longitudinal scalar waves, Tesla waves, and those waves go out faster than the speed of light, and they actually affect. One of these things can affect the whole planet, not just a healing center or temple. That was the function of the temple. We don't have a Holy of Holies anymore on the planet. But with this, I can make a holographic Holy of Holies vibrationally. And then yet when you come into that space where that is vibrating, like I said, it just makes it so much easier for you to make the leap. That was the function of the temple and the Ark of the Covenant. That was the function. And the staff as well. The staff kept, because the height of a monopole antenna is 1/4 of its wavelength. It's really amazing how that works. 1/4 of its wavelength, which is a square, right? And notice the breastplate of Aaron is a square. And I've got the precise measurement and calculated the frequency, and it's 432 times 10 to the something. So and I know what it is. And again, that why did God tune Aaron to 432? I mean, it should be one of the biggest stories in the whole spiritual movement. Nobody's ever figured this out before. And that's what I do. I calculate frequencies based on very precise measurements of temples and the staffs and the scepters. And you can see if the measurement's wrong, why did God make why is Noah's Ark 300 cubits, right? I mean, why is the Jewish temple, why is the Holy of Holies temple 30 cubits? Why? Because if you use the right one, what you're going to see in inches is the golden ratio number. You're going to see golden number. 6180339,887 is perfection golden number. So you see 61803. I mean, it's perfect. It's perfect. But you got to be using the right cubit. And the right cubit also resolves the remains of Noah's Ark found on Mount Ararat in Turkey and to 515.025 feet. So when they found the remains of Noah's Ark, they said, well, this couldn't be Noah's Ark because it's too long. What do you mean? You're using the wrong cubit. Wake up. The book of Ezekiel said a cubit of God is a cubit plus a hand. That's not a cubit. That's a royal cubit. But the Bible doesn't use the word royal cubit. But it says cubit plus a hand in 5 places in Ezekiel. Nobody gets it. They go back to the smaller cubit. So if you use the smaller cubit and the staff is 2.5 cubits, then you'd have to be a midget to walking around with this little stick way down here. But if you use the right cubit, and actually Jesus in the Shroud of Turin is exactly my height, which is just a smidgen over 6 feet. He was 72 inches in his skeleton, and with the flesh, he would be just a tad above that. Then the staff is perfect. It's right here. It's perfect. And so when you know the measurement of the staff and you know how they're made, and you know there's a reason he sent them out, because it keeps their frequency tuned to the precise God frequencies that I'm talking about, so that it's easier for them when he calls the Spirit upon them and they do their healings. And it also protects from darkness, right? So somebody's asking, how can I find my signature frequency? So every one of us has a frequency based on the height of our spine, right? And so we all vibrate, in different height groups at different frequencies. And I've actually have those available for people, so you can, because it's not just the master frequency. You divide it by all the musical octaves, and you have like 50 frequencies to work with. So I can even take the frequency of the staff of Moses and Aaron and the prophets, because all the prophets had their staff, every single one of them. Then you can divide it by an octave, and you can see that there are tones that you can mimic with your voice. There are certain pitches of the staff of Aaron and Moses and the 12 tribes of Israel and the prophets that you can work with your voice, because they resonate off in all of the octave bands. So again, going back to the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic is the secret to activating the light body. It's breath work. O thou from whom the breath of life comes, who fills all realms with sound, light, and vibration. The sound, light, and vibration part is the frequencies have to be right, because God is a measurer for a reason, because everything God measures is a wavelength, and a wavelength is a frequency, right? So it's your personal frequencies are based on the height of your skeleton from the bottom of your feet to the top.
Would the breath sound light be like incorporating the elements? So like the light would be the fire, the breath would be the air.
Well, that's what we got into.
You know what I'm trying to say?
See, the idea that Jesus baptized by fire and John baptized with water and the so you see the earth element is the body, but we're also the water element, right? And we're also the fire element, and we're also the wind element, the breath, right? So really, most likely, because we have only fragments left of the Christian part of the religion, we have more evidence actually of the Jewish religion, which really is the Christian religion reformed. There's just some reformations that, and again, the formation of the Jewish religion was not solidified at the time of Christ. It was coming into being. There are many examples in the Christian canonized scripture where Jesus is arguing with a group of Jews. This is in the book of John, and telling them they're worshiping the wrong God. They're worshiping an evil God, and they need to get straight and worship the right God. So it was very clear also at the time of the prophet Elijah. It's the same thing. There's a duel that happens between I think it's Jezebel and the king, and worshiping a completely different God, and they're Jews and they think they're worshiping the right God, but Elijah puts them on straight and tells them that actually the God you're worshiping is an evil God. So the Jewish people were not in agreement with each other. Don't think they were all in agreement. In fact, what another manuscript that surfaced, which is called, it is called it's not Hebrews, which is Hebrews in your Bible in the New Testament. It's the Gospel of the Hebrews. And the Gospel of the Hebrews, which is not Hebrews in your Bible, tells us that actually a huge amount of Jews followed Jesus at the time of Christ. He wasn't rejected by the Jewish people at all. It's a total myth that scholars and Hollywood movie makers made up, just like Moses has these stone tablets that are made of granite or something, and he can break one. Yeah, you can't break a sapphire tablet, but apparently Moses made a copy, and he probably made the copy out of lapis, which is kind of a man-made, a lower quality version of sapphire. And because sapphire is an aluminum crystal, and aluminum is a paramagnetic material. That's why I use aluminum plates here, because when my copper coils are on, the aluminum turns into a magnet and it vibrates. And the speed of sound in aluminum is over 11,000 miles an hour. So these plates really vibrate, and they give off a whole other, a really sapphiric quality of a magnetic field, because again, sapphires are aluminum oxide crystals. That's what they are. So there's something about aluminum in the power of God, and there's that's why we're using this. And then God told Moses to put a brass or copper serpent, which is a coil, on the pole, and the copper is diamagnetic material, which means it creates a force field effect. And so when you coil copper wire, which is what God told Moses to do, you're building a frequency transmitter. That's what you're doing. Because that's what Tesla did. As soon as he took copper wire and coiled it, he created the first inductor radio, right? And inductance means that if I have energy coming off of this coil and I take another coil here, right? Believe it or not, this little copper rod here as an antenna is 432 megahertz right here. This is. But the secret is that one is transmitting and one is receiving, and it is very likely the staffs that the apostles carried and the prophets carried were receivers, and therefore the master frequency can induct them, which means send power into them at a distance, at the very least at the speed of light, and then cause a frequency activation in the individual who's holding one of these, right? So that means that's why they had to carry them. Because if you see Mark 6, 1-8, it's very clear. He said, no money in your purse, no bread, no food, not even your sandals. You have to have your staff. I go to church, and my pastor does not have a staff, but but you're ministering. How come you don't have your staff? Jesus told you to have your staff. They don't have their staff. So like, that's what I mean. The Christian movement made a mistake by separating from the Jewish movement, because Jesus is a Jewish rabbi. His language is Aramaic, which is ancient Hebrew. He might have had dark skin, being in the Middle East, but that doesn't mean that he's not a Jewish rabbi. He was referred to as rabbi in the scriptures. So he's not breaking away. He's clarifying, just like Elijah clarified to the Jewish people. No, don't worship the Baal god. You're all confused. And the same thing happens in the book of John, where Jesus is arguing with these young Jews, telling them, you're very confused. You're worshiping a liar god, actually a murderer. Jesus called the God that these Jews were worshiping a murderer and a liar. Incredible. It's right in the Bible. And most people reading that, they don't even know what he's talking about. What do you mean? The Jews worship the same God we do. No, they didn't. In the beginning, the emergence of this supremely illuminated super God, I don't even know what to call it. It comes upon the scene when people are worshiping so many different deities. There's all these deity worships, and a lot of the deities they're worshiping have a little bit of power, a little bit of magnetic field, but this supreme God just dwarfs them. And that's what happened to me. The first vision I had of Christ in 1994, he just dwarfed every single guru, everyone I'd ever met in my life, just completely dwarfed him. And he baptized me himself, and I fell down in front of a giant cross, and he took me up in the sky and above the earth, and I wrote a book about it, which is my publisher stole from me, and it's still on Amazon today. So the what happens is, when your field is bigger than you are, and you start to feel, and we all feel each other at a distance, but a lot of us have a lot of fear about opening up and realizing that our nervous system isn't really our personal property. It actually belongs to God, and you can't shut everything out, because if you shut everything out, you're going to get lonely and die of loneliness. And you can see the epidemic of loneliness since COVID. Just Google it. The loneliness epidemic crisis is that we were meant to open and shine and radiate and form community spirit, togetherness. And in that field where we feel each other, we empath, or we feel what's going on in the other person. And we can feel when another person is suffering. We can feel when another person is struggling. And it's our duty to reach out when we have light to that person, to try to bring them up. And I think our world is forgetting this. This is the first greatest commandment is to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. That's the greatest commandment. But you have to know what God is. You can't love God if it's just a theory. The second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor, right? And how do you love your neighbor when you're shy or scared, or you're like, oh my God, that person's not doing well. Maybe if I get too close to them, they might mess me up. So that's what he's saying here when he says, no man lights a candle and puts it under a secret place or under a bushel, but on a candlestick where everybody can see it, which means don't be humble. He's saying don't be humble with your light. Don't hide it. Let it radiate and go into the community spirit. And so that's where compassion comes in place. It's natural. If you hurt your foot, are you just going to let it bleed? I know that when I was chopping wood and I hit my leg and my leg was bleeding, I just let it bleed and keep chopping wood. But a common person would put a Band-Aid on it and take care of their foot, right? Well, when you feel that this light doesn't really just belong to you, that it is the community, you come to the second greatest commandment, which is to love your neighbor. And that means, oh my God, if my neighbor's foot is hurt, I have compassion for my neighbor. I mean, it's natural for me as a parent when my daughter hurts herself, who's 7 years old, and even my 12-year-old daughter when she's sick, like she is now, to take care of them and make them lemon honey ginger tea and make them fresh squeezed orange juice and, take care of them and light the fire and keep the house warm. So, but when we get beyond the family, you get into community. See, I don't think the governments of the world is ever going to come and rescue the homeless, the people who are homeless. I don't think the government is going to come and fix all these problems. We have to come back to the community spirit. And that's where there's so much wealth in North America. It's unbelievable. And there's so much wealth in pockets. Like, look at Jeff Bezos, doesn't even know what to do. He wants to give away all his money. So he gives Dolly Parton $100 million. I mean, I'm kind of outraged because my boss was a nuclear fusion scientist and was working, an MIT PhD physicist, on a cube this big that could power an entire city with non-radioactive nuclear energy. And I introduced him to the richest people in the world. I mean, the list goes on and on. Michael Jackson's company, the Resnicks, who own the Franklin Mint, this guy Bob Hefner III in Aspen, who was a billionaire in oil and gas. Nobody would give us the money we needed to complete the helium-3 fusion, which would have solved the energy crisis of the world, would have given heat to all of Europe. Nobody wanted to do it. We were looking for $10 million. We had spent $25 million on 4 test models, and we needed 10 more million. And Robert Redford wouldn't help me. Jane Fonda wouldn't help me. They all said no. So I closed my company down after everybody said no. And now here, my boss, Magwitch, died with his dream unfulfilled. And Dolly Parton gets $100 million. She's already rich. What is she going to do with $100 million? Because Jeff Bezos doesn't know what to do with the money. I mean, it's kind of amazing. It shows you how out of touch people like that are, because there are 0-point energy technologies. There are scientists in the lab right now that are this close to developing anti-gravity and technologies that could change the world. And he gives Dolly Parton $100 million. I just think the world has gone completely bonkers. That if we're gonna keep people warm, and we're a population on this planet of 8 billion people now, and we're going to solve environmental crisis, we need fusion power now, because it's an environmental green source of energy. And the fact that my boss died with his dream unfulfilled is so tragic. It's so tragic that the U.S. Congress under Clinton and Gore fought us in Congress so that we didn't get our money, and made sure that companies stayed away from us because they didn't want nuclear fusion to be successful, which is a whole other story. So when you get to the compassion part, I'm saying, so you're doing the breath work, you do the frequencies, and you come into this radiant field of light, bliss, love, and ecstasy, and you want to share it. You also come into brilliance, and you start to see, what are the ways that we can really solve the world's problems using intelligence and putting money into these intelligent sectors. And then the world could really change overnight. I don't think the government is awake enough to know how to do it. I think we have to come back to the community, to the people. Need to look at, those homeless people on the street. Do you know how many U.S. veterans commit suicide every day? 17. Every single day, U.S. veterans are committing suicide. How can we? And it's because they have no financial stability. They're living on the streets. They're traumatized. They have PTSD. And these guys served and protected, and gave you protected borders, and we just let them die in the street. It's unbelievable. Where is, so that's the problem. When you get awake, you start to feel, and you feel people's hearts, and you naturally come to the place of compassion. I don't actually have any hope for either political party. I have hope for the people, that the people will eventually wake up and realize we have to make this better. We have to do it. Because the likelihood that our elected leaders are just going to magically fix everything is not very likely. In my lifetime of 61 years, I have rarely seen any political leader do anything that's ever impressed me at all. Other than John F. Kennedy, I have not seen it. You know, Martin Luther King is one of my great heroes, one of the most brilliant preachers. I mean, listening to Martin Luther King has blew my mind. Actually, you really listen to him talk, listen to him preach. He's a preacher. He was on fire. He was alive in the spirit, and he was a man of community, trying to bring everyone together. But anyway, so that's my wrap for today. Thanks for listening, and you know, next time we'll see you here next time. I mean, I'm going to keep trying to do these talks. It seems that up to 500 people are watching them. I know that's not a lot of people, but you know, it's a start somewhere. So have a great day, everybody, and see you next time.
Thanks, David. Talk to you later. Bye, everyone.